Thank you for joining us for the Accelerating the Pace of Innovation in Cities. This is, we thought, a clever title for the API panel. And today, this is a three-part panel series. And my name is Catherine Nikolovsky. I'm the founder and executive director of what has been known as Hack Oregon. Yesterday, we had a special demo day and announced that we are going forward as the Civic Software Foundation to reorient our national support. And I am just thrilled to be able to lead a conversation throughout this morning and this afternoon about collaboration and strategies for the opportunities that we see coming up with big data and using this for insight and improving the life and opportunity for everyone as we move into these modern data systems. There are also challenges in this space. And so I think that with this panel, we're talking about vision, and we have just an amazing group of people that I'm wonderfully, very actually excited to have the conversation. And so I'll introduce Scott Towsey. And with the, it was the
Cybersecurity Research at DHS.
Cybersecurity Research at DHS, of course, Sakwu. And
from NIST.
From NIST. And Michael Hanna, who is data analytics with Multnomah County. And Shannon Carney, who is program manager and also data analyst at the Portland City Budget Office. And so we have Multnomah County, City of Portland, NIST, and DHS. And I think it's a great place to start by asking each of you what you're working on when it comes to smart cities, how you frame the context of your work. And think, I'd like for you to describe that as your biggest aspiration for the work that you're doing today and what this might mean for 20, 30 years from now, what you hope to see will come out of what you're doing. And so maybe I'd like to start actually with Sakwu, because with GCTC, you've made such a beloved convening of everyone here. What would you love to see happen from the work that we're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. First, I want to congratulate CAT and Hack Oregon, now Civic Software Foundation. That was an awesome event last night, and I'm sure, and I know a lot of effort has gone into that to make that happen. And your leadership and your enthusiasm and the excitement you brought to the table made it happen. So congratulations. For Smart City, as I briefly mentioned last night, really is a collaboration between different parties. And when I say different parties, it's corporations and universities and governments, and also this nonprofits and citizen engagement is a pillar that is becoming more and more important. So that's why your effort is extremely not just important, but is critical in making these smart cities happen. Put it this way, companies can bring in their products whatever they want, and they can deploy whatever they want. If citizens do not use it, do not see the value of that product, frankly, that's a waste of money. So that's where citizen engagement comes in. And today, the way I see it is, we're still trying to figure out how these different actors are going to interact together. That's where we are in terms of smart city. This is actually a good sign, because 5 years ago, it was really two-party interaction. There's a city government, and there are vendors. So city government issues RFP, this is specification that we want to buy something, and vendors come in and sell it. And that was the process. Now, fast forward 5 years today, that two-party interaction is becoming a little more than, is becoming into something that is more than just two-party interaction. But we haven't exactly figured out how all this multiple party interaction system we're going to actually work. So I think in 5 years to 10 years going forward, I think it will be figured out. So just like RFP process, that was probably a process that this two-party system figured out for through the try and error process of decades of work, maybe, and then that became stabilized at some point in the near future, I hope. universities, nonprofits, and corporations, the governments, and even governments when you talk about local governments and federal governments, I think they'll come up with a more of a best practices or more of a generally accepted model how these different parties can interact. At the end of the day, the point is anyone can come up with something that we all can claim that's going to help all of us in the city. But if city does not appreciate it, when I say city, it's not just the government. I'm talking about really the citizens and residents that lives in there. If they do not appreciate it, they don't know about it, there's going to be no value proposition, there's going to be no ROI from company's perspective and from anybody's perspective, and it's not going to be sustainable. So I see once we figure this model out, then we're going to specifically focus on the value proposition. That's going to be the center of the mass for everything. It's basically not exactly a vision statement, but that's sort of my desire and hope how it's going to go.
Thank you. Maybe Scott, same question.
If you think back to the last century, the 20th century, the country is still riding the outcome and the benefits of all sorts of classic industrial research, development, innovation, some of it goosed by the world wars, some of it just from the natural industrial growth in the country. And, sort of the vision of that world is sort of shown in places like Bell Labs and even DARPA, where they do big things in a research place that ends up percolating into the world. But that's changing. It's changing for a whole host of reasons, but it's changing. And I think in this area, which is really important because of the population that lives in cities, because of the technology that is percolating and infusing through cities, from the back and forth arguments worldwide, the technology's ability to control populations in addition to what we want to see in terms of empowering populations rather than controlling them. So there's a whole bunch of this stuff that is really significant, but it's not going to come about from a Bell Labs and DARPA style approach. And to me, the approach that's going to have to work is what we're exploring as we speak, which is researching by networking. And I pull that from the title of a book 10 years ago, Governing by Network, that was written by a senior individual at Deloitte, but primarily by Stephen Goldsmith, who was the mayor of Indianapolis at the time and then went to New York City to try and help do some things there. And what that book talked about was the most interesting things in the government were happening at the intersection of government activities, plural, not what was happening in any particular place in the government. And they had gazillions of demonstrations and case studies showing about this, where a federal piece and a state piece and a nonprofit piece and a commercial piece and a local piece were all doing things that every one of the control structures in their bureaucracies said, wait, you can't do that. But somehow they managed to do something and slide by all those restrictions. And the leadership of that would come from any of those pieces. It didn't matter where. And I think that sort of governing by network mentality we need to be doing in this space and are trying to do in an applied research sense to explore these questions, explore solutions. In a sense, the governing process is percolating into the exploration process. And until the way that things are done, frankly, here in Portland with what you've been able to put together in an exploratory sense, until that becomes the norm and not the exception, we're not going to succeed. So to me, the vision is this kind of model becomes ubiquitous, becomes the norm. And that really speaks to the organization I come from, because we really have specialized in creating unusual research activities. collaborations with major industrial companies. We're the folks that are managing the DHS Silicon Valley Innovation Program. I'm in the middle of trying to help the Safety Act program at DHS, which is basically a governmental insurance support activity, figure out how to help deal with cybersecurity issues. That's an applied business experiment, okay? So until we figure out how to research by network, until the model that is so obviously successful here becomes ubiquitous throughout the country, that's the vision as I see it.
And Michael, so you are local in Portland, and I think that we are also sharing part of this big vision. I could see that you resonate with what Scott is saying, and so how do you feel like Portland has a unique place to be able to drive this type of vision, and then how do you see your role with the county as leading what you'd like to see us accomplish as a city in the reality that Scott's presented?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Michael Hanna from Multnomah County. I work in the IT department there, and I work in data and analytics. And I've worked a lot with Shannon. She's brilliant at the city, and you know, we kind of do a rogue city-county partnership, and you know, soon enough it'll be you know, formal, more formal. So,
By the way, rogue with city partner, what does it exactly mean? Just kidding.
Rogue 2, Rogue 3, something like that, right?
Yeah. So in terms of
It
vision,
may be worth following up on that just a little bit, because it's not necessarily a given that cities and counties are working together. When you talk about what's happening on the edges of government, and Saku, as you mentioned, this is not just about the city, this is about the citizens and
Right.
people who live here, but also people tend to forget about the county that provides quite a lot of services, and that you manage different types of data, and many people who live in Portland don't understand what happens at the county, what happens with the city, what happens with Metro, what happens with the state. So Multnomah County, it has a really good infrastructure in terms of data, and from my experience working with them from Civic, it is just a dream. I mean, every time that we talk with somebody and getting county data, the amount of work and effort put into it makes a difference. And so tell us more about this rogue partnership and about how we do this and what could be learned.
Great. So there's so many areas to touch on there, but I really resonated with what Scott was saying about the networked, you know, aspect, and you know, really to touch on that with city county is that several decades ago, which most of you probably don't know, the city county used to be one entity, and then at some point they decided to separate it out and decide on who took care of which duties, and you know, kind of make a clear separation. And I don't know if it was political or what happened, but the county got you know, the social services, the libraries, the oldest library west of the Mississippi. Our Multnomah County Library is amazing, and we got the bridges for whatever reason, and some roads. And then the city got police and fire and parks and water and all the things that the city provides. So someday that's probably going to be reintegrated either in a formal way, but in the interim, it's all about networking and sharing information. And we've been siloed for so long, and there's really no reason for us to be as siloed as we are. And especially when it comes to data sharing, we're all serving the same population of this Portland metro region. And I think it really is a shame that we don't collaborate more, because we ultimately are all trying to serve the same residents that live here and visitors. And so really what we're working on, you know, as Kat mentioned, Multnomah County has created a world-class BI architecture. It's all Microsoft, with the presentation layer is Tableau. And very soon we're going to be moving that to the Microsoft Azure Government Cloud, which is highly secure. And we've started doing partnerships with other government agencies in Oregon. And so an example of that is there's a system from the state of Oregon called Orpheus. Most of the counties in Oregon use this Orpheus system. It's around communicable disease. So what Multnomah County did is with our BI platform, we created ingesting that data and then transforming it and preparing it for reporting. And that took a fair amount of resources to develop that platform. And now we're in discussions with all the other counties that use that same exact data. And we can now provide, we have the capability to provide data as a service to these other counties to just make our whole work more efficient. We're all looking at the same data. So we can then take that data and push it up to databases in Azure and share it as a service, just the other counties if they need to look at their own data. And that was just one example. And in Multnomah County and City of Portland, we have the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which is a jointly funded program to address homelessness. Again, an issue that's all of us. So I want to touch back on the networking and kind of the big vision. So these are all very normal things, and we just need to network more. But I see a longer-term vision as we go decades out, and Multnomah County is taking steps in this direction of optimizing what municipalities do best with what the innovators and private companies do best. And what Multnomah County is exploring, which does differ from the City of Portland, but hopefully we'll be together soon, is that we are exploring, for example, municipal broadband, which is a publicly owned and operated fiber optic network. And multiple cities, 200 cities in the United States, have already moved to this. And the fundamental concept is you issue bonds, and then you build out your fiber optic network, and then the subscribers to your internet service switch to that and pay back the network over time. But here's where you're optimizing what the municipalities do best with the private sector. So we provide this platform, and again, it's a network. It's a platform that's at the speed of light, fiber optic network to the premises, all residents and businesses. But then, once you've got this publicly owned platform, you've defined your security and your protocols for plugging into it, then private companies can thrive. Let the innovation begin. So you have a clear platform for everyone to participate in, and it's an open access network. So whether you're civic that wants to provide kind of a nonprofit set of services around data and analytics or any kind of services over this massive high-speed network, or you're a for-profit company, maybe you're AT&T and you want to plug in your 5G wireless nodes into our fiber network. What's different is that in this model is that the for-profit companies are going to pay a fee to support the network, but it's very clear how they plug into the network. And I was joking with a friend the other day about smart devices, and in our model for Multnomah County, it's people first. We look at through the lens of equity and empowerment, people first and devices second. So in the model that we're going to be exploring with this publicly owned and operated fiber optic network is that the smart devices and the fees that these companies will pay, for-profit companies will pay to plug in their smart devices or network, will fund smart school children. So we are critically underfunded in STEM education. So how cool would that be if a portion of those fees that these for-profit companies pay to plug all their devices, all the electric vehicle chargers and all the monitoring, smart devices are going to go up everywhere. What if those fees go to support STEM education? What a different model that is. And then of course, another portion goes to support the network. So, fiber optic networks have a 40, 50 plus a year timeline. So, we need to maintain and upgrade that network. But it starts to shift the whole model from this for-profit monopolistic model that we have today where the FCC partners with the big telcos and extracts as much profit and puts no money into the network, to this world-class fiber optic network that we can all participate in, that pays for itself and also provides a really clear platform for-profit companies to plug into. And so you don't have to be just Comcast, AT&T, Verizon who can have the billions of dollars to build their own network. You can be a startup company that doesn't have to invest in the capital, and you can provide your service overnight. You have the open APIs published by the Multnomah County Broadband District. Here's how you plug in. you fill out your forms, pay your fees, and you're up and running. So it's a very different concept, but all around, collectively networking for our future, and absolutely a partnership between public and private, but a very different concept.
Thank you.
Great. Oh, sure.
Tell us more about the work that you do with the city and how that is supporting a long-term vision for collaboration and working with technology in innovative ways.
Great. Yeah. So thanks so much for being here. So I'm Shannon Carney, and I am the performance management analyst at the City Budget Office at the City of Portland. And I'm sure you can see why I like working with Michael over here. So after hearing about his vision for the county and the city, so you might be thinking to yourself, why is there a person from a budget office on a panel about innovation? And I think that's a fair question. It's not always a traditional the traditional model or pairing that we see, and there's a very good answer to that. I hail from a fairly new office in Portland. And we've been around about 5 years, and really our mission is to provide unfiltered information and analysis to council and the public. So where that connects with innovation, this is probably obvious to you, but is that we've really been a driver for transparency and use of data, both using data to improve performance, which is sort of all in my wheelhouse at the city, but also just providing more data to the public so that we can use it in different ways. And for example, we partnered with Hack Oregon last year, which I think blew everybody's mind at the city. Why is the budget office partnering with Hack Oregon? But because our missions were aligned. We want to put our information out there, get people engaged in city budget decision making in order to make our community better for everybody.
Our Twitter aesthetic is also very aligned.
Oh, that's
The
great.
city Portland Budget Office has a very fun Twitter.
Yeah. I can't take credit for that, but it is a lot of fun. So check it out. So in terms of specifically, I work on using information and performance data in the budget process, but also other organizational decision making. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. A second thing I do is I run performance stat meetings. We call them Gator sessions at the city. So a lot of people, we like to be a little bit different here in Portland. So, and it's based off of a performance stat model, if that's a familiar term to you. But basically, it's hopefully this will be on Twitter too. So Gator stands for Government Accountability, Transparency, and Results. It's an acronym, I'll admit. But basically, it's a structured conversation between bureau leadership and our city electeds to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for in the city. So it's honestly another example of the Stephen Goldsmith, networking to achieve outcomes instead of rules that follow processes. So I'm glad we're reading the same books. And then the third thing I do with the city, and sort of what led me to working with Michael so much, is we convene, my office convenes performance analysts and really management analysts around the city, supporting them in their work, understanding what we need as a city to move forward. So if it's technology, if it's training, different kinds of support, to have data and evidence utilized more in what we do. So that's about me and why I'm here. But in terms of how that fits into a larger vision and where we're trying to go with it, really, my hope for the city is that we can, and this is for the city as an organization, is that we can bring using data and evidence into our DNA. And that is not the case right now. I mean, hopefully that's not news to all of you, but it's just so far from how government has traditionally operated that we have pockets of really promising areas. And I think a lot of those, you've seen a lot of those over the course of this conference, where we are using data and we're driving change, and we're really we're innovating in transportation, all sorts of areas, housing, but that is not the case across the board. And so that's my hope. And then I don't want to dwell on it too much because the rest of the panelists talked about this, but I really see that as once we become a more data-centered organization, that can help us dissolve these archaic barriers that exist, around our organization, and that creates those silos that we all talk about. In the city, that is, we have our own special silos with the commission form of government, but of course there's the silos between, the county, between private corporations, and, between that make it difficult to partner with, amazing nonprofits like Hack Oregon. And then the goal is really to become more all one community, right? That we can boldly go after our goals to become a prosperous city. And this is hopefully this isn't a 20-year vision. This is more like starting today, right? But how can we confidently move towards, being a world-class city, being a global leader, continuing that role, not rest on our laurels of decisions that were made, 10, 20, 30 years ago, but continue to push for Portland being the most amazing city in the country and in the world, right? Other cities are doing that. They're thinking about what makes their city unique and what they want to be in the future. And I think there's sometimes local constraints that make that tenuous for our elected leaders to really go after that vision. And I just, and I think a city is not a collection of neighborhoods. And I might have heard you say that on a panel once, John. So, but it's more than that, right? And I think if we can work together and know that the prosperity will be shared, then that's what I hope for, for all of this work to become. So,
Thank you. Listening to everyone talk, it seems like we have some very clear themes on collaboration between people that are working at all levels of bureaucracy. And a few things, those are workflow challenges. I also feel like in the back of those conversations, funding comes up as an issue, and that we don't have good structures to fund multidisciplinary, department efforts. Maybe we can create pilots, but those are short term, and there's always so much pressure to be able to deliver these things and then to get maybe bigger funding that then is sustaining. And does that then just involve getting longer term contracts for vendors, and then all of a sudden you have an innovative pilot that can go stale in 5 years? And so when we're looking at, I was really interested in something you said, Scott, around the interesting things about government happening at the edges. But to hear that from Department of Homeland Security that has just a tradition of doing things very well by the book, so to speak, and why does that make you comfortable and excited? And how do you balance that need to want to be nimble and to kind of like experiment, want to get outside the box and collaborate? But then how does that mesh up with what government also needs to do, which is to be absolutely reliable, consistent, and make things that work? I feel there's a lot of fear of failure that has a different culture inside of government than it does in Silicon Valley. Break things, move fast, fail hard. That's not the motto for NIST. And Sako, correct me.
Why am I here?
And so, and we do have a fundamentally different role to play when the custodian of our cities, which is different levels of government, is leading the charge on building systems that are going to fit the needs that we have. And we don't have very many models to look to other than just sort of taking the private sector and contracting them, or doing these internal pilot projects that we get really interesting things happening here at GCTC. But my question is, what are some ideas that you might have before we even get to the technology to be able to deal with this very real funding and workflow challenge of getting out on the edges? And then even if that is successful, how do we balance that with the need to be reliable and consistent within what bureaus and departments need to do? That's for Scott.
Okay, that's not exactly a soup question, as the phrase goes. Yeah, because even before you asked the question, I was thinking back to the reactionary elements of what plays out in this space. I was in a company that was part of the assemblage of what became Verizon. And Verizon's a very interesting business to do a historical case study on, because they've done some exceptionally good things from a business forecasting anticipatory perspective. And one of the things they did was they set up a legally distinct company called Verizon Wireless at the time, because they knew if they tried to create the wireless branch of what was essentially a leftover of AT&T, that the legacy organization would strangle the baby in the crib and it would never grow. And of course what happened was Verizon Wireless over a decade cannibalized Verizon Classic, if you will. And so there are implications of that kind of history and pattern and why people do things, why organizations do things that are very important for us to understand as we essentially talk revolutionary business strategy, if you think of it that way. The other thing that's worth paying attention to is the thinking that I think started with Chris Anderson when he was writing for Wired, the long tail concept. And the whole reason that Amazon works is because they figured out not just how to do things faster in the peak, they figured out how to reach and touch everything under the tail, and the aggregate under the tail is larger than the stuff at the peak, but other companies weren't able to cross-connect things, all these different domains and stuff like that. And I bring that up because I think the research by network thing and what we're trying to do, we've got to find ways to connect all these little things in different ways, because that's where we're operating, and we're competing against the tendency for the government to fund the biggest programs and companies to go after the biggest payoff. And if you look at Apple, Apple essentially has succeeded not just because it's creative, but because they've created new peaks in all these different places, and they still operate off of the same large volume of business activity. And we're not going to be able to generate that kind of thing, which is a challenge for us. How do we end up making all of our lateral work across all these little payoff and benefits as successful in sustainable ways as you're still going to have major companies? Because make no mistake, all of us are dealing with the reactionary tendency for the existing control structures to pull you back into the swamp, pull you back into the things, and limit. You know, that's fine for an experiment, but then come back and do the same thing for next year's budget within the basic structures that you have to do. So it is a heck of a challenge we're all facing to try and do this. And frankly, I don't know any way to go at it other than to keep generating kindred spirits, keep generating true believers, keep generating success stories, talk about them, revolutionize from the ground up, democracy with a little d, all those sorts of things. And eventually you find ways to sort of bring the big structures back down to you and replace it. But it is a very challenging socio-economic experiment we're playing out in this sort of space, make no mistake.
Sacre, I'd like to follow up.
Yeah, so I want to go back to your definition of government characteristics. Majority of federal government, I've been in federal government only for 5 years, I'm still learning. You're absolutely correct. Government needs to have a reliable and robustness built in. So I would say majority of the federal government is designed to be rock solid, reliable, and robust. There's a little bit of minority camp, which is called the loose cannons. And I am on the cutting edge of loose cannons. All right, so that's me, and that's what I do. The way that it's like an aircraft carrier, right? So the way that you ship aircraft carrier, you cannot do it overnight. Well, you can do it in 2 minutes. It takes time to shift or change the course there. That needs somebody like me, who is essentially a loose cannon and who doesn't get bound by a lot of rules, although I try to abide by the rules. I have to, because otherwise I'm going to get fired. But still, there are some rooms and there are some things that we can do inside of the boundary. And that's what GCTC is. And NIST itself is traditionally extremely conservative organization. It's a 110-year-old organization with only one goal. It's a standard and measurement science. And doing literally, like, measure meters, length, weight, and that's what you do. And then there's a small camp inside of NIST doing smart cities and IoTs, cutting edge stuff that we don't even know what we're doing or what we're talking about, right? But we need those kind of activities. It's not just the federal government and the local governments. You need somebody like that. And NIST understands that piece. So that's why they pay my salary. They let me do what I do. I don't know how long it's going to last, but still as of today, it's going. Point I'm making is, you're absolutely correct. Majority of the government has to be built to be sustainable and robust. But there is also the other piece of the government that should be allowed to do things that goes beyond what traditional government does. Because eventually, it's like a Verizon Wireless, eventually that may become a mainstream at some point. Going back to the funding question, this is an extremely important question, not just for this group, but probably for all smart city, IoT, industry, academia, everywhere. At the end of the day, I always go back to like 30, 40 years ago, probably 20 years ago, when IT departments started popping up in every piece of the government. 50, 100 years ago in the federal government, there was nothing like an IT department. There's no IT. It was all paperwork and everything. At some point, somebody started using word processor. Somebody started using computers. Maybe that somebody was another loose cannon like me. Maybe that was not part of the budget system. That was not in the spreadsheet. But somebody started just doing it. And at some point, it started taking over. For budget issue, my observation is cities are beginning to bring in that budget items into the consideration. I also, like Kansas City has been spending about $1 million for the last few years to catalyze these activities. It was really just innovative. It was just a toy project. It was not a sustainable budget item. But it will become a budget item at some point. It may be small at the beginning, but it's going to grow. I'm sure Portland is at least thinking about it. I heard a framework got voted yesterday, so that was a good start. It's not necessarily a budget, but it's a good start. Same thing, and it's happening everywhere. That's the first step. Once it is in, then it's going to become a very important piece, part of the city policy and city administration. So be patient. It will come. It's not going to happen overnight. So again, loose cannons typically suffer a lot more than robust piece of the government because they don't have money. They typically get blamed for anything goes wrong, and they typically do not even have a lot of support from, because that's how it works. But that's the change makers. That's what they do. I mean, change makers like Kat and probably everyone sitting in this panel, that's how we make the changes in the government. So we just have to keep doing it until the point that I become afraid to get fired and then I'll do something else. But anyway, so that's my 2 cents.
Michael, I know I can feel you guys wanting to jump in, but I want to also, I have a burning question / idea that is coming to my mind in the context of Scott and Saku's remarks. The county, so last May, the city of Portland re-upped their commitment to open data. They passed for the first time a real ordinance on open data. And this was unanimously passed through city council. We are a little bit late to the game in terms of getting this official as the city of Portland, although we were early adopters of resolutions around open data that drove a lot of goodwill. But it struck me that what happened immediately after this was passed with the city of Portland is that there was this scramble race to internalize, trying to get those folks within government out on the leading edge to come up with some type of an innovative solution, right? And of course, there have been many cities doing this all over the place, and then we try to get something together for a pilot. I think that the expectation is there needs to be more serious funding to support an open data plan long term after we've passed this ordinance. And it doesn't seem necessarily clear how that might look in relationship to if you end up just getting successful, maybe you do have budget. Do you then lose your opportunity for further innovation if you have a locked-in vendor process? And then how does this become agile with the county, right? So I started looking into what's the city of Portland going to be doing? Like, what are the most interesting things that we could do to paint a picture for a long-term vision and inform city council when they come, to consider next steps? And then I go talk with folks like Michael Hanna and Bob Leake, who's the CIO, and they're already doing all the amazing stuff. And the city of Portland passing a resolution is not the same as the county passing the resolution. And so we have these different chambers. And so I'm curious to hear how you, like very specifically within the context of what's coming down the pipes in Portland, what does this conversation mean for informing our next steps to achieve this type of vision?
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you want to talk? I'll speak to that first, just briefly. So, so yes, Kat's right. So we did pass a new open data ordinance last May of 2017, and it did. So we did have some associated funding with it, and that's actually why for the folks that were able to see the equity framework, the Smart Cities equity framework that council passed yesterday. That's really the funding, the staff resources. That drove that change. So we are seeing, some of the change, and it's this sort of ironic. I think, the change comes from people that are hungry for it, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's in their job description, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's their formalized role, and that's certainly the case, I think, for me, and some of the changes that I'm trying to bring about more of a business intelligence strategy along the lines of what Multnomah County is doing for the city, But in terms of the open data, at the same time, it's hard to make progress unless you have some staff involved, unless it is someone's job to put together the ideas, bring together the stakeholders, and get that work done. So in terms of what's next for Portland, we have a bit of a plan that's embedded in that open data ordinance from a year ago, and that's really what Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, they're in a lead role directing the city. They have a new open data lead, and we are coming together as open data stewards from each bureau to really do a data inventory across the city, figure out, kind of take the ultra private stamp off of our a lot of our key data sets that have really been just hidden for a really long time. As a city, we have a lot of open data already that's mostly around around geographic data, really strong in that area. But basically all of our tabular data has been, locked away in a file. So I think that's really the promise of this new open data program, is that we can even those peaks and valleys a little bit and provide a stronger foundation for, for folks like you and your organization to work with us to get at some of the questions that really you couldn't access, but you couldn't address before. So things like the development process and some of the internal stuff that we do. So and budget, for example. So I think it's very exciting. It's very promising. I think obviously a lot of you have heard about the pilot that we have with Puddle, the Urban Data Lake, and I think that that could be where the type of way that we're housing our data. Civic, we're not locked into a specific platform yet. So I think that's also an exciting place to be. So I have more to say about the funny piece, but I know you wanted to talk too, right?
Sure,
Yeah.
So in terms of city and county, one of the things that I think is really great is that each of our organizations have are leaders in certain areas. So the City of Portland is much more a leader on open data in terms of standards and really trying to get out there and be a leader on that. And Multnomah County, with Bob Leake, we've really invested in the internal BI platform and a scalable, infinitely scalable platform for BI and data governance. We have a full-time data governance person. There's 11 FTE in our data and analytics enterprise program. And so, we're pretty far out there in terms of the structure, as we're kind of talking about, but the city, so that's where the more that we collaborate, we can bring the best of our strengths and innovation and share information. And, it's those who are familiar with government, one of the things that we just don't do well, we're so siloed. We don't share information with each other, we don't share information with civic organizations. That just needs to shift dramatically. Because especially for government, for example, we're not competing. We're not private corporations that are trying to hold on to their deeply held intellectual property. There is no barrier for us to share our intellectual property and our innovation. There's no barrier. Obviously we need to protect individual data like HIPAA or CGIS or other privacy from the data standpoint. But in terms of innovation, there's literally no barrier. So if we innovate and we can help City of Portland or any other city or county in the world, let's just share our intellectual property. It was funded by taxpayer dollars. We should absolutely share that openly. And so that needs to be happening much more often. And then in the open data platforms, to kind of come back to this platform concept, that's really where I'm putting my energy, is in the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, as I mentioned, but the platforms and the standards and the protocols. Because once the platforms and standards are clear, everyone can participate, whether it's information exchange between government agencies or information exchange between government agencies and private entities. So the platform is key. And an example of that in the transportation realm, some of you might have heard of Movell. It's a transportation platform. They're a spin-off kind of innovative company of Daimler. And what's really interesting about their transportation platform is that it's designed to be a universal platform that both public agencies and private for-profit agencies can plug into. But from an end user experience, it's one single app and one ticket. So for example, let's say that I have my TriMet platform of the future powered by this technology, and I want to go to Beaverton. I can put into my app and say, I want an all-electric transportation option and getting to Beaverton. So I buy my one ticket, and so I take my future solar-powered Max trip to the Max station, and then when I get off, an electric vehicle is going to pick me up, and that could be operated by Lyft or Uber. It doesn't matter. Any company can operate that, and I just go right to my destination. Or I get off at the Max station, and then I get on an electric bike that was sitting in a solar-powered charging station and take that to my final destination. But from a user experience, it's one seamless platform that would allow TriMet as a quasi-public agency to operate that. But then massive innovation can happen because, again, the platform and how you plug into it is open and clear. It just, let's say you own 3 electric vehicles and you want to plug in this platform and provide that service. You can do it. The protocols and the way to plug in is published, it's clear, you plug into the network, it's open APIs, boom, you're up and running.
Thank you. As we are nearing the close of the discussion this morning, I think that it is important to touch base on some of the risk and security aspects, which is also a theme of this conference. And so I anticipate that as we're talking about all of these opportunities, and you say that yes, this is correct, that a lot of this is public data, it's not necessarily sensitive, and by default it should be open because it belongs to people, and that we can invest in systems to facilitate the sharing of this information, not only between government bureaus and departments, but to have this create a number of different other use cases we haven't thought of. And if that becomes a positive, this is innovation and this is good. If something happens, and as Sakura, you were mentioning, some of this innovation just happens because we're drawn to just do these little things that are making our lives easier. Like, I'm going to go ahead and put this spreadsheet online, or we can have these open APIs, and it just accumulates. And when we think about that big vision for the future in a super positive sense, not to take it to a dark place, but how do we imagine putting in some of those preventative measures around security that are above and beyond just encrypting data to keep it safe from bad actors, but that we just can't anticipate what it will mean when we start to connect all of these sources? And how does NIST think about that? And from this conference, what would you really like to walk away with for people who attend and are thinking also about this question?
I'm going to give the question to
Okay.
Scott.
Okay.
He is much more expert in this.
Okay, okay.
I'm the loose cannon. He is much more rock solid.
Gee, thanks, Naku. It is the core difficulty. And there's really two core difficulties. One is the underlying economics make all this work when it's not sort of the classic, I control the IP. It's a very popular item, everybody wants to buy it, the price goes up, and things get built that way and so on. This is a difficult challenge to make work economically. We've talked about that a little bit. But it also is difficult in the security sense because, you know, if you remember back the Oklahoma City bombing by Timothy McVeigh, you know, after that happened, procedures were put in place so that if somebody started to buy unusual amounts of commercial, agricultural explosives, whatever, that, you know, that would be triggered and flagged and so on. And you know, ironically enough, after 9/11, there are all sorts of people around the country that for fun are watching aircraft landings and takeoffs. And one of the reasons we didn't have to put complicated military stuff in aircraft to keep a missile from bringing it down was because nobody could go set up in a place at the takeoff or landing spots because all of the hobby birds were there and we noticed somebody doing something like that. You know, so security solutions are as much people-based or more so as they are technology-based. And that's really hard because we still have a challenge in this country. We see it play out in lots of different ways. Somebody who is a good cop simply has a mindset to look for things that are different, abnormal, unexpected. And that's not what most of us have to do. And that's a good place to live in a country where most of us don't have to be, you know, looking over our shoulder all the time. So we've all know of places around the world, some have visited them, where, you know, the crime level is substantially higher, substantially random, et cetera. And we're essentially dealing with the same digital situation. And I think what people have to do is you have to build in naturally and organically expertise that knows what's normal in the connected Trimax system and in the connected digital lake system and all these different things. And that can be done if you fold that into the educational ideas and processes, and you've talked about that quite a bit, the educational role of all of this as an adjunct. And if you've got your systems populated broadly with people that know what normal looks like, then you simply encourage them, remind them, speak up, say something, talk to somebody about when something looks weird. Now, many times weird is just weird, you know, things happen. But, but most of the time a security problem, somebody has seen some trigger or indicator of it, and they've, you know, for whatever reason, we've had just too many people asleep at the switch that didn't notice it and went on by. Because we're not going to build the perfect app that's going to catch people from doing something bad and keep them from happening. It's just not going to happen. An open system can never work that way. And DHS, for all of its procedures, all of its organizational stuff, it's populated by a lot of really good individual cops. We have more badged people, uniformed police people than any other part of the government. There are a lot of people in there that spend most of their professional time pulling back from the formal system and asking, what's weird? And that's where we want people. So that to me is the security solution and approach to think about.
So I'm going to add a little bit slightly different spin on it, but this is something probably I think is the most important thing in open data and any kind of data analytics projects we do. So I talk to a lot of researchers in open data and AI, before it's called AI, they were called the big data, all that. And that was confirmed. My concern was confirmed last night by a lot of presentations, 4 presentations I saw. They say when you use data and to extract a useful outcome out of it, lack of algorithm is not exactly the problem. That's like 10% of the work. The other 90% is actually getting the data into the form they can use. It's a cleaning the data. And one of the team election, I think the team last night talked about PDF. I actually think if you have a PDF, you are lucky. Actually, you have it in electronic form, and that's not necessarily the case in many cases. So, and the problem is this, in big data world, for example, I mean, the team said they use a random forest classification, which is one of those algorithms in machine learning. That needs a significant amount of data to make it work, to make it accurate. That's the nature of the algorithm. Now, if you have to manually take the PDF data, whatever, into spreadsheet, you're not going to get as much data as you want that it can be usable. The problem is that here's the problem. Why funding? You don't have enough funding and activities for that piece, to clean up that, because it's not fancy at all. It's 90% of the work, but whoever does that work doesn't get highlight and spotlight on the stage. The guy who came with this fancy algorithm, random forest classification, that's what he did. But he essentially wrote a few codes, and there's open source codes. You don't have to even write a long code. Few functions, and basically click a button and start generating result. But then there's a guy who spent a lot of time until a week before today, yesterday, who spent a lot of time in cleaning up the data to make it ready to plug into that, doesn't get as much a highlight. So here's a problem. To make the open data for any data science successful, you have to really look at the under the hood, not just the fancy machine learning algorithms and all those kinds of stuff. How to get the data where we are today to the point that it's usable, and frankly, coming up with just API and itself is not actually a solution. If you want to use it in machine learning, there are certain features that data has to include. And when you open up the data, you have to make sure those features are opened up along with the data set itself. So I think that's going to make or break in civic innovation, specific data side of the civic innovation going forward. It's just, I really needed to say this.
Thank you. I'm glad that you said that, because it is a pretty good capture of what our experience is, and why we built Civic was to try to create standards around those APIs with features that then we can begin to centralize these. When we do all of that work, we can at least show that carrot of what you do, what you can get at the end of it. And they're just examples that then could be remixed and iterated on. Well, one of the ways that we do get volunteers to do all of this heavy work is that the same guy that did the data analysis with a few lines of code at the end also was the same person cleaning it all up. Most data scientists understand that it's not mostly glamour, and it takes that 95% of the time to do the last 5%, but it's motivating to want to get there. And I feel like every time that we hit that peak, it just starts all over again, because you now have 5 new questions that you want to answer, and you need to be able to have these systems available. And I feel inspired from listening to everyone this morning, because it sounds like there is a general sense that the technology is not what's holding us back. Like, this is not that the tech isn't here. This is a collaboration challenge, and that it almost feels as though if we were to fix that with dollars, with our ways that we work around the edges, but also maintain, that rock solid core, that we have a belief that the technology is going to match our values, and that in the future, if we can start to get things more available and push a little bit, we're going to build those systems that we want to see, and then we don't know what's going to happen. But if it's encouraging the positivity and it is just feels good at all these little steps along the way, we can handle the challenges that come up. And really the big innovation here is finding new ways to work so that we can enable the possibility for us to even just try, right? That's the 95% actually we're talking about. And the building of the technology that we need for smart cities is that 5%. We need to spend all of that time really figuring out what we want to do and get clear about our vision. So with that, I'll let you have some closing remarks. Anybody who would like to say anything, pass it around. Thank you.
Yep, so thanks again for listening. I've certainly learned a lot from the panel, so hopefully you have as well. Yeah, this is all, I'm glad to confirm that we're all working on this from our different posts and at different levels. For me, talked a little bit about, what we've done most recently in Portland, but I think I do agree with you, Kat. I mean, it's not about the technology. It's about how we can restructure ourselves so we can actually take advantage of the information and the technology that's out there. You talk about from Hack Oregon turning information into knowledge and that can be used. And I think bringing that knowledge into the places where we do decision making in our organization is really key. But you've also touched on just a couple more things, in terms of what I see is how to get to that vision of the future. I do think we need to sort of cordon off a space for the city and create a sort of a sandbox where we can actually do more risk taking. I think right now we are significantly constrained by the need to get everything right and the processes that are designed to help us do that. So when I look at other cities that I think are doing this well, I think DC Labs is a great example. Mexico City has a sort of a laboratory environment that's underneath the mayor's office. I forget the MCDMX or something like that, where they've done some really interesting sort of civic experiments. I think Portland is so ripe for that, and so that's one thing I know that we have an Office of Community Technology that's going to become a standalone office. So I'm hoping that we can sort of ride that wave and really build that up, and that can be a focus for us in terms of where we're prioritizing funding for how we bring in data evidence. So more program evaluation, additional ways that we're looking at process improvement, human-centered design. We can double down, triple down, quadruple down on those areas, so we can figure out new ways we're bringing in information into the core decision making that we do, and doing it in a way that doesn't risk all of what we do as a city government and with the county, but where we can really focus those efforts on specific wins and build support for doing more of this in the future. So thanks again.
Great, thank you. I would say, I think as has been mentioned, that technology is not our problem. That is relatively the easy part. I mean, I mentioned at a event we did a couple weeks ago where for-profit companies have invested billions of dollars into the BI technology and AI and all these, and Microsoft has put billions and AWS and billions in their cloud technologies. The technology is solid. I mean, it's so scalable at this point. It's so accessible. It's so solid. The technology is not the problem. It's a human problem. It's a collaboration problem. It's a networking problem. And so really, I think from a county perspective, our work has always been about leading with our values. Like I mentioned that, we have tried to shift over the last few years all of our programs to be viewed through an equity and empowerment lens. So whatever our county programs are, that's the lens that we view through. So for example, when we've talked about, again, back to this municipal broadband, the leading lens that we're looking at is the fact that 30% of Multnomah County residents, low-income residents, do not have broadband in the home. And many of those, or most of those, are students, have students in the home. So nationally, it's called the homework gap. So, almost all homework needs to be researched and uploaded now, electronically. So if you're a student in Multnomah County and you don't have broadband at home, or you have intermittent broadband because you're low income and, when the bills come, you have to sacrifice the broadband. It's the first thing to go, right? You got to pay your rent. So if you don't have broadband, how could you possibly compete in the future? So from Multnomah County's values perspective, that's number one. Like, we are going to close that homework gap. We're going to make sure that every student in this city has fiber optic, subsidized internet, the end. Then we can now talk about what else we can do with this platform. Now that we're going to fund STEM education and make sure we close the homework gap, now business can thrive. Now instead of hundreds of millions of dollars being sucked out of the local economy by the big telcos, we're going to circulate in the local economy, and massive innovation, massive thriving of new businesses in the local economy. You know, that's excellent. And also, we can start building platforms because it'll be a publicly owned platform that we can plug into. So it's about shifting this whole perspective, but I think it's all about people and values. What do we value? And I think security is core. You know, it's a balance of all these things, but they're values. You know, open data, transparency, accountability, accessibility, inclusion. These are all core values. If we view all of that we do through that lens, the technology, again, is not the problem. Thank you.
So the only thing I'm going to add is let's keep supporting the civil servants in local governments, and let's keep supporting volunteers who try to make things better. And this is people part that we're discussing over here. Because without our support, this will not going to take off in a time that we are alive. Okay, so I want to see this happen when I can see it. Anyway, let's keep it going. This is so exciting, and I think we are all trying to do the right things and do a great job. Keep it going.
I think the only thing I'll add is that it's actually not so much security as trust. Now, you want to have the security in there, but does the populace believe in it? Do they use it? Does it generally work? Is it motivated properly? Are the privacy questions folded in the right sort of ways? Is it not being misused by somebody? You know, the nightmare that I have, of course, is that some of these city platforms go virally successful and it turns into a really big thing, and all of a sudden somebody starts to mess with it. Because that's what you see in most of the connected world, is success is followed by, oh, let's see what I can do. Either because there's a money interest to steal stuff, or there's just a vandalism, maliciousness to it. But at the end, this is all really a question of trust. Security is a piece of that, but it's not the only thing. And many of the things we've all talked about here this morning are the other elements of that trust equation.
Well, thank you. We are actually finishing right on time. I think that there's a networking break at 10:15. We'll be back for 2 more follow-up panels after the break. We are going to get into workflow after we discuss all of this vision. We got to get to the brass tacks of what this actually is like for these organizations working with government to help enable options, and then we'll have a more technical panel on the tactics of, you know, we say, it's easy for us to say here, the vision people, oh, the technology's easy, that'll come. we'll talk to those folks in our third panel. So thank you.
Thank you.